me just 1 minute. I'm gonna stream with Facebook as well. Go live. Perfect, and we are live. So welcome everyone. I'm Celeste from the New Haven Free Public Library. I work in Knives Square, and we have our EIR, Julia Gambale, with 2 important guests tonight. So I'm gonna just let you introduce them and welcome everyone. I'm gonna be here for tech, but any questions, if they're not answered, I will try to pass them out. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Celeste. And thank you to the New Haven Free Public Library. As Celeste has said, I'm Julia Gambale. I am the entrepreneur in residence until the end of June. What does that mean? I hold office hours 3 days a week, Tuesday from 11:30 a.m. until 1:30 p.m., Thursday from 6 p.m. until 8 p.m., and then Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. I also get to bring you programs just like this. This is something that some people don't understand, so I wanted to make sure that business owners and entrepreneurs know that this is an option and really get to dig deep into what this is. So this is perfect. I'm super, super grateful that Randy is coming back on. I'm going to introduce her in just a moment, and Jen Gorin as well. So I'm going to start with Randy. She is a native New Yorker. She has a BS in marketing from Pace University and an MBA from the University of Dallas. She is founder and managing director of Marketing on a Mission, LLC, a marketing consultancy in Fairfield, specializing in working with mission-driven social enterprises. Prior to this, she led Affordable Marketing Solutions, a small business marketing agency, for 13 years. She is also on the board of directors of Arts Alliance of Stratford, serving as their marketing director. In a previous life, she was VP of Marketing and New Product Development at a financial services company and was the first general manager of the startup co-branded credit card division of a global travel company. She is also an author of a small business marketing book, writer, cat mom, and award-winning adjunct professor of marketing communications. Thank you so much once again for joining us and let us dig a little bit deeper into what B corporations are.
Thank you both again. It's been a pleasure, and I want to welcome back anyone who was here last week for the basic what is a B Corp. The B Corp movement is really taking off, especially in the United States. So today I am thrilled that Jennifer Gorin agreed to co-present with me today. She is going to be talking about actually how to become a B Corp. So a little about Jen. She founded Impact Growth Partners after identifying a need for businesses to streamline how they measure, improve, and communicate the good that they do. Prior to founding IGP, Jen directed large multinational mergers and acquisitions at Credit Suisse and political and corporate market research at Penn, Schoen and Berland. Jen is committed to expanding access to capital for underrepresented entrepreneurs and continuously supports initiatives that enable women to become investment decision makers. Jen has her MBA from Harvard and lives in Westport, Connecticut with her husband and 2 boys. And so I am going to turn my mute button on, and Jen, please take it from here. I'm so excited to hear this.
Well, thank you so much, all of you. It's great to be here. I'm excited to be part of a New Haven focused audience. I grew up in Woodbridge, so I spent a lot of time in New Haven. So Randy, thank you for inviting me to present. I'm going to share my screen. I have some slides. They're not nearly as pretty as Randy's were last week. And she told a lot of good stories. Mine are much more dry and boring and to the point of the process of B Corp certification. I will spend a few minutes revisiting some of the areas that she covered, but a lot of it will really focus on how do you get through this process. I'm going to share my screen. So Impact Growth Partners is the name of my company, which I founded in 2017. And starting in 2018, we were working with companies to achieve B Corp certification. We're based in Westport, Connecticut. We have an all-women team, except for one male intern, a college student at Bowdoin College, who's awesome. And our work has always been virtual. So even before COVID, most of the work we would do with clients was via Zoom. So they would have access to their books and records and documents as we go through the questions required for B Corp certification. So while we love to work with companies locally and we're very focused on growing the Connecticut B Corp movement, we do work with companies all over the world. So what I'm going to cover is very briefly, since Randy covered it last week, is what is a certified B Corp. Then I'll go into depth on the certification process and requirements. And then if we have time, I'll go through some reasons companies certify. And feel free to jump in with questions at any point. So what is a certified B Corp? So a certified B Corp, it's for-profit companies only that meet rigorous standards of social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. And working counterclockwise here, this is how I think about the B Corp certification process. You're evaluating the company on 5 areas: the environment, employees, community, governance, and customers. And underpinning all of those areas are a focus on your supply chain and diversity. So those are integrated throughout those 5 categories. And you're also evaluating both the operations of your business and what your business model is. If your business model in and of itself is having an impact on these 5 areas. And finally, the impact on all stakeholders is really what the end goal is, to ensure that your business is having a positive impact on all stakeholders and not just focused on shareholders. I think you saw this slide last week, but this is a snapshot of some of the well-known certified B Corps. There are over 4,600, about 2,000 or so of those are in the US. It is a global movement. There are a number in Canada, really all over the world. There are certified B Corps, but the US is the largest geographical representation with around 2,000. And I wanted to point this out about the B Corp community. I know many of you watching probably have small businesses. The majority of certified B Corps have under 50 employees. And many companies are startups and have, say, under a few $100,000 in revenue. So it is a great program for new companies, as well as larger multinationals that are more and more frequently starting to adopt the B Corp requirements. Though they are so rigorous, the earlier you do them in the process of your company's development, the easier it's going to be, and to make changes to help you meet the standards. And this I wanted to share, since we're in Connecticut. This is our Connecticut B Corp community. We are launching a Connecticut B Local, and that's been initiated by myself as well as Jen T. Grace at Publish Your Purpose Press out of Hartford. And we have committees now and events, and we are looking forward to bringing more B Corp focused events to the Connecticut community. And many of those will involve inviting the broader community. So keep your eyes out for Connecticut B Local events. And it's really exciting to be. This is really one of the reasons to become a certified B Corp, is to be part of this community. All of these companies have done really hard work to get to this point. Is this a chat for me? So certification process and requirements. So there's 2 key measures to achieve B Corp certification. First, you have to meet a legal requirement, which I'll go through in more detail in a moment. And then you also have to meet an operational assessment, which is achieving 80 points out of a potential of around 200 points on this operational assessment, which covers the areas that I mentioned before. So once you've achieved that 80 points and submitted your assessment, you go through a detailed review with B-Lab. You sign some other legal documents, including a declaration of interdependence. You pay an annual certification fee, and then you receive a public B impact report, which is listed on the B Corp website. And you have to recertify every 3 years. So I'm going to break all these down in much more detail, but that's an overview of what you need to do in order to become certified. You need to meet a legal requirement and an operational process. So the legal requirement is important to understand because there's a lot of confusion in the language. So a B Corp is not a benefit corporation. A benefit corporation is a legal corporate form. So many states, Connecticut included, Delaware included, allow for the incorporation of a company as a benefit corporation. From a tax perspective and operational structure, shareholder structure, it's the same as a C Corp. So if you're a C Corp, you do have to become a benefit corporation. What that does is it ensures that it gives you permission to consider the impact of your actions on all stakeholders, not just shareholders, whereas under corporate law, that's not as clear whether or not that's okay. But if you are an LLC or any other business type, you do not need to convert to a corporation. I just want to make sure that's clear because many people think that, oh, I'm an LLC, but I would have to become a corporation and that will change my tax status and shareholdings, and it's much more complicated. But that's not the case. If you're an LLC or an limited partnership or any other structure, what you have to do is you have to adopt specific language that's written by B-Lab and it's on their website into your operating documents. And it's actually a pretty straightforward process. It does require shareholder approval, but most small businesses that are LLCs have very few shareholders or very few members or owners. And so it's a fairly straightforward process. Converting from a C Corp to a benefit corporation is a more in-depth process, and it really depends on how large you are, how many shareholders you are, and there is legal work associated with it, but we do work with a number of lawyers that we can introduce you to if you're interested in learning more about that process. And if you're a very large company, meaning over 50 employees, you do get a grace period before you actually have to make this conversion because it can take some time. But if you are fewer than 50 employees, this is a requirement in order to become certified. I also wanted to mention that there is a pending B Corp certification for startups. This is for companies that have been in operation for less than 12 months, but have at least one person working full time. One of the reasons this is important is because the assessment evaluates a company on its prior year's operating and financial history. And so for a startup, that's really not possible. So for a startup, you have to complete the B impact assessment, which is what I will get into in more detail, but your score doesn't matter. What matters is that you adopt the legal requirement. So you have to have the legal requirement fully established within your company before becoming a pending B Corp certification. The process for that is the review is light. There's not much of a review of your operations because you don't have anything to reflect on yet. But you do have to answer all of the questions in mind of where you want to be a year from now and pay $1,000, that's the base fee, to be a pending certification. And then within a year, you have to submit for full certification. Otherwise, you're no longer pending. And then you move on to the more detailed process, which I'm going to go through now. So the impact assessment covers these areas that I keep mentioning: governance, workers, community, environment, and customers. But what it evaluates both your operations and your business model. So one thing that's important to understand about all of these areas that the impact assessment covers, as I said, you get around 200 questions, and they're all very specific. And you don't have to be doing everything. So if one of the questions is, say, about your high-low pay ratio, your pay ratio, you could get 0 points on that. You could be far outside of what the B Corp requirement is on that, as long as you've made up points in other areas. So that's kind of the beauty of the B Corp assessment and why it can apply to so many different industries and sizes of companies. They're all having some impact, but it can be in different areas. So you do have a lot of flexibility in that. And what it's measuring is both your operations, So the things that are here in white are the things that are really focused on the operations of your business. So for example, in the community, what kind of civic engagement and giving are you doing? That's part of your business's operations. But in the community, a business model may be something that's called design to give, where it's really part of your business model to give up to 5% of your revenues every year, or some other large metric, or to a foundation, or be owned by a nonprofit, or give that back to the community. So that's actually a design to give business model. Or local economic development. If you source from, sell to, produce within a small local economy, everything you do is impacting that local economy, and you will get points for that local economic development, regardless of what you may be doing operationally. So you can look at it twofold, and there are some companies that get a lot of points on the business model, say like a company that is operating, that is putting in place solar panels. They are going to get a lot of points for providing renewable energy. But how they operate behind the scenes, they might not pay their workers as much or be as invested in the community. So they might not be as strong as another company. And then there may be a company that it doesn't have an impact business model at all. Let's just say, I know Randy's business now is mission focused, but before that, she provided marketing consulting to small businesses in general. That in and of itself isn't an impact business model. But if she paid her workers, did a lot in the community, managed the day-to-day operations of her business, well, she could still reach that 80 points. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you get that. All makes it sound like it's fairly easy to get there, but it's still not. But there is that flexibility. I see Julia's question, do some questions hold more weight than others? Is that why it's color coded? Now the color coding is related to just what's business model oriented versus operations oriented. Another great example is, so workers. As we mentioned, an operational thing could be what your high-low page gap is, how much you're paying your workers, if you're paying them a living wage, what types of career development opportunities you have. Those are all how your business is operating, regardless of what the business is actually doing. But the workforce development business model is, I know Randy brought this up last time, is Grayston Baker is a great example because they have that open hiring practice. So that's part of their business model that isn't necessarily specific. It's not comparable to other operations. The operations questions are they could be attained by anyone, whereas this is very unique to them that they offer that workforce development model, and so that they would get additional points for that. I hope that's clear. I'm sorry, what do you mean by asking, can you grow? Maybe they can ask that again. So this is what the platform looks like on the website. So there's a website called bimpactassessment.net. It's actually free to sign up and create an account for yourself. And this is what the assessment tool looks like. It's all online. And I wanted to go in a little bit in depth on what the questions look like, just so you understand that they are very detailed and they are not really yes or no based questions. What are your company's practices regarding donations or community investments? So they're not just saying, what do you do, or do you do this, yes or no? And as you go through the assessment, you think about, okay, what am I doing now and what could I possibly be doing? And for each question, it's allocated a certain number of points, and depending on what you do, you get a certain percentage of those points. So let's say this question is a maximum of, say, 1 point. If you do 1 or 2 of these things, you may get a quarter of that. If you do all of them, you get all. So it's, each question is structured differently. They're very tailored. As I failed to mention that this can be applied to, we mentioned that there are more than 4,500 certified B Corps worldwide, but they're also across almost every industry. So the questions there's a database of around 1,600 questions, and then based on your industry and company size, you receive questions that are tailored to that, around 200 questions that are tailored to that. So here's the question: what are your company's practices regarding donations or community investments? It can be anything from, we have a formal statement, which is fairly broad. We have a formal commitment. We match individual workers' charitable donations. We allow our workers or customers to select those charities, and we have screening practices. So you can always choose none of the above and get no points, or you can select what you're doing. And when we work with clients, we identify goals as to what they could be doing if they want to do more than they currently are. And then a lot of questions are calculations based. So you need to dig into your payroll register and do lots of calculations. So this is what percentage of employees on a full-time equivalent basis are paid at least the equivalent of a living wage. And so there are databases which tell you what a living wage looks like, and you actually have to do the calculations. So it's a lot of work. And then everything that you get points for, you have to show evidence to B Lab for when you go through the review process. Here are a few more questions. So on governance, what is the company's highest level of corporate oversight? You can be anything from just owner or manager governed, which could just be like an LLCs often. You could have an executive committee and more in-depth governance. You could have a non-fiduciary advisory board, and you could have a formal board of directors. They recognize that there are all of these different structures, and there are different points allocated to each. And then they dig in more deeply. If you do have a board of directors, how does it operate? How is it composed? How often does it meet? And things like that, to really see how strong your governance is. A couple of questions on community. Has your company worked with policymakers to develop or advocate for policy changes? Yes, we've offered our support. Yes, we provide active staff time. It can, there's the scale there again of how deeply you've gone, and the points you receive will be dependent on how much you've done. And then, as I mentioned, suppliers is really important. What methods does your company use to evaluate social or environmental impact of your suppliers? We share policy or rules, very general. We don't have a verification process in place, all the way to we have third parties conduct audits or reviews of our suppliers at least every 2 years. For that, you're going to get the maximum number of points. I would say a lot of companies we work with certainly aren't that deeply engaged with their suppliers, but the goal is for all companies who take this assessment to identify things that they can be doing even better and more deeply. So the process for actually getting certified, once you've taken this assessment, answered these questions, you submit it to B Lab, and you have to pay a $150 fee at that time. And then you move into what's called the evaluation queue. And there's a fairly long wait at this point because there's a lot of backlog. It's taking around a year to get certified, but you will have interaction with B Lab at various points throughout that year. And when you get through different queues to your evaluation and verification stage, it can be pretty intense for a period of a few weeks as you're working with them for them to review your documentation. So once you're in the evaluation stage and in the verification stage, you're working on that online platform and you're uploading all documentation to reflect your answers to the questions. So if you said more than 75% of your employees are being paid a living wage, you have to show your payroll register with the calculation of their employee, showing each of their hourly pay rates and how that compares to the living wage where they live. So it's a lot of work to get verified. And then once you're verified, you also, as part of this process, have to fill out what's called a disclosure questionnaire. And these are yes, no questions. But what they do is they highlight risks to the business. So lawsuits, or if you're in a risky industry that may have some questionable practices around it. So things that they won't make you ineligible for certification, but B Lab will want to talk to you about them. And then once you've done the disclosure questionnaire, done your verification, you sign this declaration of interdependence, and then you become certified and pay the fee. And then once you're certified, you get, as I mentioned, this public profile on bcorporation.net. You can go to the website, www.bcorporation.net, and there's a drop down called Find a B Corp, and you can type in the name of the industry, and then you can pull up B Corp, and they will all have all of these details. They've actually recently changed the platform, so it looks a little bit different than now. than this now, but it has basically the same information, which shows your overall score, whether or not you've ever been best for the world, and then a breakdown of where you're getting your points. And this is really informative to anyone who's interested in either working for or investing in or buying from a company that's a B Corp. And you may think, why is that company a certified B Corp? Because it may not be obvious to you that it's doing good in the world. And this helps you see that. So Data.World, which is a technology company, you see they're getting a lot of their points from workers. That means they have like amazing worker benefits and pay and programs. And they're also doing a lot in the community. Now they're not doing all that much in the environment, which a lot of companies that go through the assessment like to use this to improve their businesses and achieve better scores next time. So I'd imagine Data.World is doing some work to improve that environment score. And then, as I mentioned, these are the fees. They start at $1,000 if you have under $150,000 in revenue, and they go up in very small increments, interestingly. And then, so it's really just based on your prior year's revenue. So those are pretty much the details on how to get certified. Are there any questions coming in on that you think I should address before I go through a few of the reasons for certification? Yes, as you grow, so do your fees, exactly. And you have to recertify every 3 years. So you have to go through the assessment and you're certified, then 3 years later, you start the certification process again, and then you're answering the questions for your bigger business. So that can change the outcome. And they also do update the certification standards periodically. So I'm going to go through some of the reasons that we see for certification. And if anyone ever has any questions on those details of how to get certified, feel free to jump in. And this is some of this Randy touched on last time. She went through it in one page. Now I'm going to go through it in a little bit more detail. But so hopefully you'll get a really good idea of the B Corp movement through this. So this is just a list of some of the key reasons: marketing and communications, creating community, generating economic value, legally protecting your mission, benchmarking and improving impact, and leading a movement. So on the marketing and communication side, so B Corps love to work together. B Corps love to collaborate. Once you're a B Corp, you're connected to other B Corp leaders and you find ways to reach your market. These are a couple of examples we love. Here's an example of Ben & Jerry's with New Belgium Brewing. And so Ben & Jerry's is basically collaborating with two B Corps. They collaborate with a beer company and they collaborate with Grayston Bakery on their products. And there's a number of other examples that you see like that. Also, many companies are starting to aggregate B Corps, whether it's on their website or in a store setting. And actually, if you look at B Lab UK, this is much more prevalent in the UK. It's B Corp month right now, and they did some great posts on their LinkedIn and social media about some of the businesses that are doing displays for B Corp products. And they even have a pop-up B Corp store in downtown London that is selling all B Corp products. It's pretty amazing, or displaying all B Corp products. So that's an example of a lot of the more reach to customers that you'll get through B Corp certification. B Lab also does a lot of its own marketing and its own campaigns that your company may not be specifically addressing it, but once you're part of it, you're tagging B Corps, you're really part of this community, and it's elevating your brand in that way. And during the holidays, they actually choose companies that sell goods to give away and to promote specifically. There's a lot of social media around specific companies. If you achieve a best for the world status, you get a lot of marketing around that. And then it's B Corp month right now. So if you're paying attention to social media now, you'll see a lot of B Corp coverage. And then there's the global and local community. As we said, it's a global movement, so you're really tied into what's happening globally, but the local is super important. There are B locals throughout the country. That's more of a US-centric movement, the B local movement. There are more and more coming online every day. And as I mentioned, Connecticut should be launching ours soon. We're in the process. We need to go through a few steps with B Lab to have it formally on this list. B Lab also sponsors a number of ways for B Corp certified companies to work together. There's an annual champions retreat. There are leadership development workshops. Both they used to be in person. They've continued to be on Zoom. They're going back, starting to go back to in person. And then there's the Beehive, which is effectively B Corp's kind of proprietary LinkedIn. It's where B Corps can. It's not run by LinkedIn, but it's a similar type platform where B Corp with access only to B Corps and where they can interact with each other. There's also a lot of media coverage around B Corps, as I'm sure you've seen if you pay attention to anything related to ESG, stakeholder capitalism. It's where the world is going, and more mainstream media is covering it. It's also a great way. Sorry, I'm going to answer this question. Let's see. Does this mean that B Lab also packages or marketing for B Corps to pick up and use themselves? For example, they do provide a lot of assets that are easy for you to customize and use for yourself. They don't actually do the work for you for your business. American Express, these examples may be actually, I think what you're describing is similar. Yeah, we received a whole, like the background I have now, that came out for B Corp month. So I have that now that I can use. And there are assets you can use for social media, you know, and for, as you mentioned, the word templates, is for templates to go through for your newsletters and things like that. So they do provide a lot of that. You still have to do it yourself. Maybe someone like Randy can help you do it, but they do provide a lot of those assets to be coordinated with the B Corp branding. So on activism, a lot of B Corp leaders are naturally activists and really want to see the world become a better place beyond just what they're doing in their own businesses. So they come together and create even more work around and more, create even more of a difference around what being a B Corp means. In the past, there's been the Dismantle Collective, which has more recently been replaced by an independently run a BIPOC network to work on its own to make sure that the right changes are happening within the B Corp world. The B Corp Climate Collective has set a collective target of net zero 2030 and works on a lot of initiatives related to that. And then this article here, this was a full page ad taken out a couple of years, it was about 2 years ago or so, when pre-COVID, when the Business Roundtable made the announcement that they were adopting the guidance that companies should take into consideration all stakeholders and not just shareholders, which was a big shift. But B Corp's reaction, B Lab's reaction, and these names that are kind of blurry, our CEOs of B Corps, their reaction was, it's nice that you say that, but really get to work and show us that you're actually going to make changes to your businesses that reflect that. So there are so many different ways to get deeply involved. And then that ties to really this broader systems change, which not only relates to specific activist areas, but really moving the needle on social and environmental impact from a broader perspective. And there are a few ways B Lab is doing that. One is they're collaborating with the UN Global Compact. There is a platform built into the impact assessment, which helps you measure how you're doing on the sustainable development goals. So if that's a priority to you, and it's not quite as well known in the US, but it is something that's used more globally, where companies are identifying the sustainable development goals that they are trying to help reach with their businesses. And similar to the B impact assessment, but it's not scored as deeply, B Lab and the UN Global Compact together have provided a structure to evaluate how you are doing on each of these areas and what you can do to help meet those goals even better. So that's actually integrated right into the B impact assessment. This year, or the past year or two, they've been working with the White House to on a proposal, an initiative for inclusive economic growth, and to create a council within the White House for inclusive economic growth. And then there are the founders of B Lab, some have moved on to other things, and the former general counsel, all really deeply tied to what B Lab's mission is and advancing stakeholder capitalism in an even deeper way. Some of it's from the legal side to get larger companies to adopt benefit corporation status and to get proxy voting on benefit corporations, and then also really to get the large investors to start really focusing even more deeply, not just on the light ESG metrics that exist now, but on really what impact companies that they're investing are having. Another reason companies like to certify and even just use the impact assessment is to assess what they're doing internally. As you saw, the questions are so detailed that they give you amazing ideas of what you can do to make your business better. But also to take their score and compare them to other companies and see how they're doing and set goals for themselves. I didn't mention this metric before, but while there are only around 4,500 certified B Corps, over 100,000 companies have actually registered accounts and taken the B impact assessment, some in pursuit of certification, but some just to use it as that tool. And there are some companies that have all of their divisions take the impact assessment, or asset owners that have all of their portfolio companies just use the impact assessment as a tool. And then you can see here, score-wise, companies like Eileen Fisher, Patagonia, and Ben & Jerry's, I call them flagship B Corps because they've been B Corps for a long time, as well as are very, very public in their B Corp activism. Eileen Fisher started out with just an 81. They barely made it, but they identified ways to improve that score, do even better with their supply chain in other areas, and they've moved up to 96. And Patagonia keeps on moving the needle as well, and Ben & Jerry's. And many companies, once you're in this and you have a score, you just want it to be better. It's a pretty exciting thing. And finally, well, it's a lead a movement. I keep saying 4,500 companies, like that's such a huge number, but it's still small out of the hundreds of thousands or of companies that there are that could potentially apply. And so those who are becoming certified now are still getting on the ground floor of this movement. So let's see. I'm just checking the questions. As you implement better processes, that's absolutely, yes. When you recertify in 3 years, you can answer the questions to reflect your new processes in place. In between, you can't improve your score. It's only every 3 years that you can improve your score. This is my contact information if you want to reach out to me. Any other questions? Anything from Randy or Julia?
I don't have a question. It's such great information. I just learned so much. I thought I knew a lot, but I realize now I don't. So thank you. I've started my BIA. I mean, I only opened my doors in October, so I can't, obviously I don't qualify quite yet. Single
You can be
owner.
pending. You can just take
Right. Exactly. Right. And that's my goal. Spring break, because I also teach 3 university classes. So spring break is next week. So I'm going to really concentrate on finishing it when I have some time and headspace to do all this. I'm curious, has any company ever been denied a recertification? And if
Absolutely.
so, oh yeah, really? They actually can go backwards. So then they're also given the opportunity to fix or do better, or
so once you submit, whether it's in your regular certification process or recertification process, you go through this review process with B Lab, and they often knock your score down. So you may submit with say 95, but they don't like the evidence you're providing, or you really didn't interpret the question right, and so they will. And if you get knocked below, so you can't submit until you reach 80. But say you reach 80, but then they take away some points. They don't say, okay, you can't come back to us for another year, 3 years. They give you 3 weeks to which, you know, is a short amount of time, but at least you can revisit it to really look more deeply to see if there are ways you can get points or if there's some change you can make that will help you get there. So it will give you that opportunity to remedy it in the short term, but that still doesn't guarantee that you're going to get there. And yes, there's a decent amount of churn, I'd say, in B Corp certification in terms of companies that choose to not necessarily get recertified because it's so much work. The recertification is just as much work as the initial certification, or the fees associated with it, or whatever reason, but then also those that don't meet the bar anymore.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that, you know, B-Lab really is, integrity is really important. So that's why there's the legal requirement and such in-depth review of all of the operational and business model criteria. Well, you know, greenwashing is fairly easy to do. They want to make sure that they are avoiding that as much as possible, and that integrity is really strong.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah.
So when they're providing proof, I mean, there's a lot that's being taken into consideration. When I was looking at that chart, and there's 200 questions and all the different areas and everything. How long does that take, do you think, usually? I guess it depends on each type of business and who's available to kind of like pull all these reports and everything together and all the proof.
Exactly, and that's why we as consultants can exist, because there's so much to keep track of. It takes up so much mind space and time. We've been through the assessment so many times that we know how to navigate it. We have templates for a lot of the policies that you may do in practice, but you might not have it written. So we help create those, and then we, you know, help guide the collection of the data. And yes, you're right. So it can take, you know, someone with a small business that creates a number of policies, they may be able to get to the assessment on their own in, you know, a few sessions, and then create some documentation. But if it does take a number of weeks. The way we work is we recognize that business owners have a day job, and this is even more cumbersome if you have to really distract from that. And even if there's someone who, say, a B Corp leader or you know, someone in a sustainability role at a company who's in charge of this, we find it works best to work on a weekly basis. So one Zoom call like this a week for a couple of hours to go through questions. They start to get pretty tedious, and then have a week between calls to assess what needs to be done, dig up information, answer unanswered questions and things like that. So then it does take around a month to 6 weeks to actually get through the whole assessment. But then it's done in a very detailed way, so you're much closer to being able to submit and have documentation ready.
So with that being said, if somebody is a startup, an entrepreneur, what kind of advice would you give to help them kind of wrap their head around just starting right out of the gate in this mindset, basically, that, you know, they're really eager to get this certification, and, you know, that they're already, you know, like, gosh, this is really how I want to run my company, you know, and kind of not feel overwhelmed or defeated.
Well, it's hard to not feel overwhelmed. It just is.
Yeah, just know you're going to be overwhelmed.
If the entrepreneur, but if their mindset is what you describe,
yeah,
what I would recommend is they look at the assessment, because it will help them identify the things and that's why, while pending certification, since you don't have to meet a specific score, it may seem like, well, why do they even let you do that? Because you're not necessarily doing anything. But what it does is it helps small businesses set the roadmap for their growth. And it's much easier to do those things initially as you're building the business than it does retroactively. So a couple of examples. One is, what bank are you using? So that's actually a question that receives a meaningful number of points in the impact assessment.
right.
If you're using a bank other than a huge multinational bank that who knows what they're funding with your assets, a credit union or a local community bank or a B Corp certified bank, that's something that's really hard to change once you have had your
Right.
operations going for a lot of years. So if you're an entrepreneur thinking of starting a business and you take the assessment, you'll identify these things and say, okay, I'm going to put that process in place now. And you don't have to do policies or become certified right away. You at least have it in mind as you're building your business, or things like who are your suppliers. You know, there's some things that it's hard to find substitutes for, like GoDaddy and Microsoft. But if you work with someone local or an underrepresented founder-run company on certain things, that also adds to how you're building your business. And again, it's easier to do it initially than along the road. And also companies, supply chains, if they're evaluating those suppliers more deeply as they start building it, that's much easier than switching down the road or imposing requirements on those companies.
If someone is contemplating, like myself, or maybe a retail store or manufacturing, what are maybe the top 3 things that they should be looking at as they start this process?
Yeah, again, everything is so important, and there are so many areas that are covered. It's hard to identify what the top 3 would be, but you know, things that come to mind would be your suppliers. Absolutely, you know, take a hard look at who your suppliers are and what you know about them, who owns them, who runs them, if they have any certifications, if they're local, so who your suppliers are, and you know, you can put your bank into that category. What your worker policies are and how robust they are, and how you're paying your employees, and what kind of benefits you're providing to them. Those are some key operational areas that really can move the needle a lot. So those are a couple of areas that I would look at. And then, you know, there's so many others.
One of the things that I did when I was setting up Marketing on a Mission was I changed banks. I'd been with a community bank, but I went to another one, knowing that this was one of the questions, actually. So that was good. And then I also recently found out, you mentioned GoDaddy and Microsoft, and I do know that now there are a handful of B Corp website hosting companies. And actually the company that is, I think they're called Theme Forest, they are a B Corp. And that's where I got my WordPress theme from. So it is starting to trickle down into the nitty gritty. So it actually at some point would be really easy, hopefully, to find a vertical, you know, a B Corp in a vertical that you need in order to help you get certified. So it's really changing pretty quickly.
Yeah, and as I spend a lot of time talking about the marketing benefits for consumer-facing companies, but it's really also important for B2B companies. So the first thing I do when I need a supplier now for something, and you know, if I didn't have my website already, that's great to know that there is that web hosting company. You go to bcorporation.net, find a B Corp, type in the industry you need a service in, and look for someone to provide that service. And that's always my first stop, and many other B Corps too. So it does provide a lot of B2B advantages also.
Makes sense.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity and to talk to everyone here. And our goal is to just educate people on the B Corp movement. So feel free to reach out to me at any point. And I'm happy to answer questions. And, you know, and this presentation can be done, my consultants can do it also if you have any other groups that may want to learn more of the basics like this.
Thank you. Can you put your slide back up that has your information again? Perfect. So what we're going to do is, because this is recorded and because it's also on Facebook Live, this is going to be available for people to go back to as well. And Randy, I know you're going to want to grab the video as well. So we'll keep an eye on this, both through the New Haven Free Public Library and the other resources, so that if anybody does have any questions, if they're not watching it live right now, they can go ahead and do that in the chat of whatever platform you find it on. I want to thank everybody very much. First of all, the New Haven Free Public Library for letting me do this programming and explore all of these areas and topics that, you know, I'm certainly interested in. So, you know, I'm getting an education here too with everybody else.
Exactly.
Yep, you know, I was like, this is great. And Randy, of course, for always, you know, saying yes whenever I'm like, hey, can we like explore this a little bit further? And you went above and beyond and just really dove into
morning.
this.
We've done that.
I'm good. Okay, we could do this. And Jen, that was just like some really great, amazing information. I'm going to go back over the presentation as well, because that was definitely it wasn't an information dump. Like, you really did kind of go through the process. And I think that it makes us all kind of breathe a little bit easier, that we can just take this in chunks and kind of reevaluate, or if you're new, an entrepreneur, and evaluate what your process is going to be. I know that right now I'm working with a couple of entrepreneurs that if these were the questions that they had, you know, they're switching suppliers if they're doing like a clothing line or something like that. What does that mean? How does it impact, if they're thinking about impact on the environment, the community, and whatever that is? These are definitely questions that they can ask themselves.
Exactly. That's what it should be used for. If they, even if they don't feel like they're ready to go for a full certification, it's
Right.
educational.
Right.
Just get through the building blocks.
Exactly.
Right. And, you know, I've been saying to prospects too, you don't have to be a B Corp to do good things for
Right.
society. You know, it's not just like flipping a switch and all of a sudden you're just this B Corp and, you know, you love everybody and your social mission. I mean, it's got to come from here, and you have to want to do all the right things, not just for the certification,
Right.
but in order to just be a good human and to run an ethical, transparent business, because really the certification is just validation that you're already doing these things. So you have to really want to do all these things, because it certainly does, Jennifer, sound like a whole lot of work. But I wouldn't say, oh, I'll just become a B Corp and, you know, things will get better and I'll be a social mission. It's got to be like baked into who you are and your own personal ethics.
Perfect. I thought that was perfectly said. All right, Celeste, I'm going to let you close us out here.
All right, perfect. So thank you so much. Like Julia said, it was amazing information, and this is gonna be in Facebook, and later on it's gonna be in our YouTube channel as well. So you guys can see it from there as well. And thank you so much, and have a good night.
Good night,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.